Hey everybody, it's David Spark. I am your producer and host of now the officially named CISO series. If you checked on LinkedIn, I made a big announcement about the rebranding. We are now officially just the CISO series. That's how it's going to be from here on in. So we are now also streaming live on LinkedIn and also on YouTube, God willing. This is all working here. Okay, I don't have to do anything. That worked. All right. Hey, what do you know? I did something correct. All right. So, what I was going to say is, our topic for today is hacking privilege identities gone bad. I have as my guest Dan Walsh, who is the CISO, brand new CISO at Village MD. He was originally at Rally Health, or not originally, most recently at Rally Health. And also joining me is Raj Mallampati, who is the COO, Chief Operating Officer, over at CloudKnox. And if you forget, he's wearing a sweatshirt that says CloudKnox on it. There you go. There it says right there. And we're also going to say a big thank you to CloudKnox for sponsoring this very video chat. All right, let me get through all the mechanics up front, and then we'll jump right into all the fun of this event. First, if you have a question, go ahead and ask it. You can submit it, ask a question anytime. Bad ideas. I know you're going to have plenty of them for this very topic. So please throw out the bad ideas. They are ready for the challenge of whatever your bad idea may be, which will play as the Department of Yes halfway through the show. The link at the bottom of the screen has next Friday's video chat, which is hacking build versus buy automation. Go ahead and click that at any time during the video chat. It will not take you out of this video chat. You will stay in this video chat, and we'll say it's you'll stay in this very video chat, and you'll be able to register for next week and be part of this. And also, if you've never done it before, we at the very end are going to have our one-on-one meetups. They are a lot of fun if you've never done them. So please stick around for our one-on-one meetups at the very tail end of this show. Nothing to plan at all. Just show up. We do the matching, and it's just random 5-minute meetings with another cybersecurity professional. All right, I got all of that out. Let's get to our topic at hand, which is hacking privileged identities gone bad. Let me set up the premise is that according to the most recent Verizon data breach investigation report, credential theft resulted in 67% of the breaches, meaning that the reason you were breached is somehow legitimate credentials were accessed through some other means, and they appeared to be a legitimate user on your system, but they were not, and therefore they were able to sort of roam freely, do what they want, and in a sense, well, not in a sense, in actuality, breach, take some of your data that you didn't want them to do. So I'm going to start with you, Raj, on this very question is, what are telltale signs that a credential has been compromised?
Sure. Hey guys, Raj Mallampati here again. So look, so some of the telltale signs is all of a sudden if you start seeing an identity, you see a spike in activity. For example, if they're actually leveraging some infrastructure, if you suddenly see them actually starting to delete some of the storage buckets, they start to see, doing any of those malicious activities, you bet that's not generic general behavior. That's when you know that there's a telltale sign for a malicious activity, right? So that's one telltale sign. Second is if you see anything that is what I call anomalous behavior, so nothing that's normal. That's again a very easy way of saying.
So, so what do you define as normal? So that I think this is going to be the big question. Absolutely. And I'm assuming this is what your product does, determine what's normal, what's not normal, because there's some normal behavior, but people do odd things that you don't expect all the time, and it's legitimate.
Yeah, so look, normal behavior implies looking at historical activity, right? Take 90 days, take 180 days, so 3 months, 6 months worth of activity. And based on that, establish a pattern, right? So think of it as let the machine learn, let the algorithm learn what normal behavior is. Anything that's not normal, right? You absolutely need to at least a minimum alert that it is an anomalous behavior, right? And depending on the potential risk you associate with it, you basically say stop that activity, or let me just set an alert, right? So it's basically data-driven, method of actually detecting what's an anomaly or an outlier. That's again very, very critical. And again, the key is look at historical patterns to determine what's normal, and anything that's not normal is abnormal.
All right. So Dan, you live normal and abnormal on all the time on your networks. What can you tell me that like maybe you can just give us an example, like what you spot as abnormal behavior that you start investigating more?
So, I mean, I think to Raj's point, a lot of it is, I would say, the frequency of which valuable assets are basically accessed. Normal baseline behavior, especially with privileged, to Raj's point, over time is pretty standard. If you start having, I would call it like access creep, where a lot, especially in our cloud environments, you have a lot of access to things that people don't use day to day. And so when you start seeing kind of that activity, that baseline that Raj is referring to, which is 100% right, the longer baseline that you have, the more standard patterns are going to emerge. So even something that only occurs maybe once a year, you're going to do some sort of DR exercise within your infrastructure. That's normal behavior, because if you have a baseline of a year, you'll see that it actually is quite normal and not anomalous.
That's actually a very interesting point, that that you need that much sort of timeline. So let me ask then, Dan, what are safeguards or watches you put in place to essentially look out for this? And by the way, is this like from what is said in the Verizon data breach investigation report? And I've talked to many CISOs about this, and they use that as a mechanism to write a security plan they may have in place, or create credibility for a security plan that they want. Do you lean on those findings? And when you see things like that, like this, ludicrously high number, but I'm assuming a lot of this is going on, this is just maybe legitimizing what you knew. How sort of on top of it in terms of your building out your security program are you on that very specific behavior of, we got to watch out for, legitimate credentials on our system?
I think it depends. I hate to say this because it seems like a cop-out answer, but I think it depends on kind of what your business is and where your risk factors are. Like, as an example, in my previous organization, we built consumer-facing applications, and so the need to really make sure that we got a handle on, like risk-based authentication and true identity of our consumers was extremely high. In the environment, in the company that I'm at now, that footprint is much smaller, right? And so the focus really is on kind of internal privileged access folks. So I think it really depends, on kind of what the organization is. It also depends at the maturity stage of where you're at with your program. It sounds terrible to say this, but you may have higher security risks that you need to tackle first before you even get to that.
Well, and that, I mean, let's just think about, the basics of, the CIS top 20, Yep. It takes a while to get to this point that we're discussing right now. Hey, I got a question that came in from Steve Gigier. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. You tell me in the chat room if I did. And I'm going to mention the last thing he said before I read his question. He says, am I using this Q&A section right? Steve, yes, you are using it right. And let me read the question. And I'm going to send this to you, Raj. Can I trust ML, machine learning, or SIM use cases to determine normal and not generate false positives that create more work? I'm obviously lazy, says Steve. Steve, I don't believe you're actually lazy at all, but I appreciate the humor on that. Can just basic machine learning and SIM use cases determine what's normal and not normal? I mean, is that enough?
So from my perspective, right, there's always two things, right? Yes, machine learning is a good starting point, right? And again, I use the word, it's a very good starting point. to sort of get to understand what's a false positive and what's real, right? I mean, I would say it works probably closer to 90 to 95% of the time. But at the same time, right? I mean, so think about the key thing that Dan was also talking about was, look, it all depends on the length of the data they've collected, right? A year's worth of data, 6 months worth of data is very critical for you to sort of minimize the false positives. And then again, AI ML-based algorithms are constantly learning, right? So the more data you feed in, the less number of false positives, right? And on top of it, I basically tell all the the SOC, all the folks who are in the SOC or any security professional is leverage that, and then on top of it, leverage your experience, right, to minimize the number of false positives. The goal that all of us have, all we vendors have, is to minimize the amount of time or the mean time to resolution significantly, right? And that's where these AI ML algorithms help out a lot. It's almost next to impossible to eliminate it completely.
Next to impossible to eliminate. I'm sorry, what specifically?
To eliminate the false positives.
The false positives.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you always want to minimize. But how about this? We did a show on Defense in Depth about machine learning failures, and we had Davi Ottenheimer, who's absolutely great. He's been writing a ton about this, and he talks about how it doesn't take much to essentially really kind of mess up a machine learning program. Now, again, I don't know, but is it feasible? Because I mean, really good hackers or malicious hackers, let me qualify, really good malicious hackers can simulate regular behavior and then all of a sudden not simulate regular behavior. Or they could simulate a new kind of regular behavior that could be fed into the machine learning system over a period of time. Now, the question is, it all depends on like how eager they are to get at that access to the data, how much time they're willing to spend, because malicious hackers are just as lazy as anybody else. They don't want to spend the time unless the value of what they're getting is worth them putting the time in. So what have you seen in terms of disrupting the machine learning algorithm, and how do you deal with that, Raj?
So basically, so there are a couple of things there, right? So in terms of, so the key thing again here is if a credential has been compromised, especially if it is, especially if it is something that is, I think I'm seeing some of the bad ideas there, right? So, I mean, there's
going to be plenty of them.
I can see that, right? I mean, so if a credential, has been compromised, especially if it's a privileged credential, right? Then it is, then absolutely right? It becomes more and more difficult to actually figure out the overall compromise, right? But here's the key thing, right? So what we do, or what every CISO does, is we are all proactively trying to sort of manage the permissions associated with any given identity, right? So proactively make sure that the number of high-risk permissions are minimized, and then only only elevate somebody's role or permissions on certain instances, right? So it's all about reducing the attack surface proactively, right? And on top of it, the reality is that's, again, like I said before, it's never going to be 100% perfect, right? So that's where you, again, try and get the anomaly detection, outlier detection going, right? And that's basically the approach that we take for cloud infrastructure permissions, right? And I'm sure, and again, this is talking to multiple CISOs. That's exactly the approach they want us to take, right? So long-winded way of saying, like, look, that's the best way by which we can minimize the attack surface and minimize any malicious attacks. In fact, even insider threats too, right? That's sort of what we end up doing to proactively and reactively reduce anomalous behavior.
Got a good question. Go ahead, Dana, and also.
Well, I was going to say that's like the flip. What Raj was talking about is like is the other side of the coin of zero trust, right? So, zero trust is this whole concept of trying to kind of lock down the different permissions as people kind of go through your network or kind of go through your infrastructure. And what he's saying is like, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, right? And so it's kind of looking at it from a different perspective, which I think is very valuable.
So good question that came in. I'm going to throw this one to you, Dan. It came from Roland. Oh, by the way, one thing I forgot to mention. Anyone can join us on camera. Just type "bring me on" into the chat, and Andrew, the producer, will try to bring as many of you on as possible. If you got a question, you got a comment, please join us on camera. Happy to hear it. But you can just type your question too. I'm happy to repeat it as well. And butcher your last name if you'd like me to do that. And let's see if I do that here. Roland Garfien. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Throwing this one first to you, Dan. Curious to hear your insight about the role of user provisioning process in this matter and how much the process can play a part in securing your privileged access by design. So, like how much of getting user legitimacy, I'm assuming MFA, can greatly sort of deal with this problem?
Well, I think it can help a lot. When we think about, authentication in general or identity in general, let's focus on the authentication side of it, right? It used to be it's the, what you know, who you are, and what you have, right? But now, and like I'd say the last like 3, 4, 5 years, now it's somewhere you are, and it's the activity you do, right? And so there's other, especially now with like the advent of these things here, right? There's a bunch of other type of data and metadata that we can take advantage of to kind of layer in another factor. So, things down to the type of operating system that your device has, digital fingerprinting, even things like, what kind of emojis you have on your phone or your machine. And then from somewhere you are, if the majority of your workforce is distributed in the United States and you start seeing, IP hits from other areas or areas where you don't have staff, that's another area, that's another item to take a look at.
So there's a good number that you're doing that are essentially to the user passive, meaning yes. You're watching the behavior. So you don't even need to ask the second factor if one of the alerts go off, essentially.
Well, we always want to have multi-factor, but okay. I'm saying these are additional things that you can do kind of in the background.
Raj, you're nodding your head. Go on.
Yeah. So what Dan just mentioned is what I call context-aware authorization, right? So fundamentally, context is, where are you logging from? What activity are you doing? And then even things like, time and day, right? I mean, yeah. I give the classic example of I'll just say, if Dan is typically sort of logging in from, or Dan's credentials, right, are being logged in from somewhere in the US, right? All of a sudden, if you see 10 minutes later, see Dan's credentials logging in from, let's just say, Australia, right? It's impossible for Dan to have traveled in the last 10 minutes from the US to Australia. So that's, again, context-aware authorization, right? So it's very key to actually make sure that we understand those variables, right? Activities, where are you logging from, what devices are being used to provide a context-aware authorization, right? So that's again very key for detecting and understanding anomalies, and at the same time to reduce the attack surface.
Good question came in from Eli Migdal, who's the CEO of Boardish, and I think this is an interesting question because in my mind, I think they both have problems, but in completely different areas. And so I'm going to throw this one to you, Dan. What is a more risky scenario for a technological insider threat? A mid-level system administrator or a high-level non-techie executive? This could be a good what's worse question.
Yeah, actually, that is a good what's worse question because, some organizations, especially if you're in a startup and at the beginning, all the founders got access to everything. I would say the high level executive is probably the worst.
By the way, a bad idea just like that came in from Sean Bowen, something like that.
But again, with the mid-level system administrator, if you're looking at Fortune 500, that could be just very damaging and damning. So I think there's, again, I hate to say it depends, but I think it depends on kind of how the company is grown and the way they've historically managed access and identity.
Well, okay, let's play the what's worse game here. Which is worse of these two scenarios? If you had to take a breach from one of them,
it would be the mid-level.
The mid-level?
Yeah, because
why? What's with the high?
I mean, well, just think of it from a consumer point of view. If what would be worse? I'll pick on Amazon. Well, for people from Amazon, I apologize, but Jeff Bezos getting having his credentials released, and somehow somebody can take something down, or like a system admin at Amazon.
All right. We have Mike Wilkes, who I know is a brand new CISO over at Security Scorecard and was a guest on this very podcast. In fact, the last show we did in New York, in fact, I was just looking at photos of that very podcast. Mike, thank you for joining us. You have a question, comment? What you got? What's on your mind?
Yeah, I just saw this pop and I wanted to jump in and say hi. But my question is, did you guys already talk about integration with like ServiceNow, where privileged users don't get to escalate up out of the password vault unless there's an active open ticket for the device they're trying to log into? Because for me, that's the holy grail of PIM, right? Privileged Identity Management. We have not.
Raj, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, so that's actually a great sort of segue there, right? I mean, I absolutely agree, right? So there's basically, there needs to be effectively a notion of, to get any privileged access, right? The goal is to actually make sure you get approval before you get access, right? It doesn't matter if it is ServiceNow or if you're using any other PIM-PAM solution itself, right? But the idea is don't hand out privileged access like candy. I guess I'll use that as one of the bad ideas. Don't hand it out like candy. It is got to go through a stringent approval mechanism, and hence a process.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I'm going to take I want to take back the earlier question was asked by Eli Migdal. I want to throw this one to you, Raj. So which is worse, having a high-level executive breached or or essentially administrator breached?
I would just say, look, I mean, the fundamental thesis I would say high-level exec breach, because typically high-level execs typically have access to more confidential information, right? Mm-hmm. So my point there being that, look, if a high-level exec has too many permissions, that effectively implies that there's more of a leak from a confidential information perspective.
Right, but what doesn't the administrator have more access to the actual systems than the high-level executive, though?
So typically, it depends on, do you want? I mean, yes, you're right, but the high-level exec has more confidential information, right? So that's the key, right? And so basically, it's like more systems versus more confidential data.
Right?
That's kind of like the
they both stink. Anyways,
and the larger the company, the more likely restricted that system admin is going to have. It'll be a system admin of one or a handful of systems.
By the way, the poll is up currently, by the way, everybody, for the best bad ideas, and we will start the game in 7 minutes. So go ahead and you get 7 minutes to vote for your favorite bad idea. Essentially, the one you want Dan and Raj to answer in the Department of Yes. As well. And then I announced the winner next week on Tuesday, because I don't have time to go through all 30 of these right now, for that matter. All right. Oh, we got tons more questions that came in. I didn't even realize this. Okay. So we haven't talked about service accounts right now. This comes in from Leon, and I'm going to throw this one first to you, Raj. Given MFA is not available to service account used by machine, any suggestions on securing those service accounts?
So for me, so service accounts, I mean, just to put things in context, right? The growth in service accounts is probably more like 5 to 10 times more than a human identity, right? Okay. So the best way, so that's just putting things in context, right? So what I say again for service accounts is I mean, the core, the core key thing to think about for service accounts, and number one is look at historical patterns to figure out when is a service account actually being used, right? So typically what we see most of our customers is, and obviously prospects and most enterprises is, there are patterns there, right? So give what I call permissions on demand for service accounts, especially if they are, lack of better words, high risk permissions, right? So that's what I would recommend doing practically across the board for service accounts. And
anything to add to that, Dan?
No, that's pretty comprehensive.
All right. And Matt Black gives me an easy last name. Thank you, Matt. How do you manage? I haven't read. How do you manage for a lot of cloud first organizations where there's so many cloud platforms you're trying to watch behaviors on? Well, I'm going to throw this one first to you, Dan. And actually, this is, I know, very relative to you, Raj. Go ahead. How are you dealing behaviors across multiple cloud platforms?
So right now, I'm not dealing with it. I've got one. I have one cloud platform, and we're actually getting into another cloud platform, but it's very small, which is why I met with Raj last week to talk. So, I guess a shameless plug for Raj in that regard.
All right. Well, thank you, Raj. Raj, you have a better answer. So give us the highlights of your conversation with Dan earlier.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I mean, more and more, enterprise and more companies are actually going into a multi-cloud and or a hybrid cloud platform, right? So fundamentally, the best way to actually manage threats across a multi-cloud platform is, number one, is standardize on a single, lack of better words, permissions management platform. That's one key thing. And then the second one is leverage. I actually encourage most of my customers, if not all the customers, to take this information into a SIM tool. And again, I know I'm doing a shameless plug there, but certainly work with ingest the data into a SIM tool so that you can actually look at correlate the activity, right? So use a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud permissions management platform, do the initial visibility and insights there, and then map it back to other data streams. So that's basically what I would recommend doing across the board. And look, I mean, this is actually becoming more and more of a challenge because, like I said, again, almost every company I talk to has at least a couple of public cloud environments, and if they're a larger company, they typically have on-prem cloud solution, right? So hybrid clouds.
So David, I have to admit, I was getting not credential stuff, but common stuff when you answered that question. So you caught me flat-footed.
Okay.
but in all seriousness, though, it has to start kind of I think upstream with your identity and how that identity is kind of formed as the person onboards into the company. And then you have to just have a real tight process with that, as it kind of flows through your different systems.
Okay. Here comes a question from Christina, who most recently a Microsoft employee. She has left. She has not told us where she's going. Maybe she'll break the big news here. Christina, will you break the big news here? What do you both think of policy-based / conditional access based on that context? So she's referring to what Azure Active Directory offers today. I don't know specifically that. Can you speak to that, Dan?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I don't know exactly what it is. You know what? We'll come back to it. Christina, give us the details of what you mean on this question specifically. All right, let's go to the next question. All right, this is an interesting one. I'm going to throw this one to you first, Raj. Periodic access reviews. It comes from Krista, and she says, does the human factor / data / system owner as a reviewer reduce the confidence factor in effectiveness of this process as a control? Or do you treat every user the same? Like, do certain users become more risky users than others, I guess, is the question.
Over a period of time, yes, right? I mean, I again fundamentally believe, right, identity is the new perimeter, and then zero trust is pretty much the only way to go, given that there is no other perimeter, right? And Sorry, I was just looking at a bad idea there. Get your wife to do access reviews. I'm sorry, that caught my eye there. But so look, I mean, the key again is look, I mean, it's very critical to do periodic data reviews, right? Data reviews, and when I say data review, I mean permission reviews for any given identity, right? That's absolutely critical because you'll see that as time progresses, this whole notion of the permission gap. So specifically, when I say permission gap, it is what permissions have been granted versus what you're using keeps increasing, right? So, lack of better words, you can call it the permissions creep, privilege creep, right? So it's very critical to do the the data review, permissions review every. I would probably say pretty much at least quarterly, if not monthly. That's one, right? Second is if you don't do that, what happens is that this whole set of permissions keep getting stacked up, right? And that effectively implies that you're increasing your risk, right? That's certainly my recommendation. Dan?
All right, hold on. Before Dan, we actually have to. It's 30 minutes past the hour, and we have to. We got a call. Just came in.
Hello, welcome to the Department of Yes, where no request is ever rejected.
All right, hold your thoughts on this, Dan, because we do have some really horrible bad ideas, and we're going to throw the first one out at you. Okay?
Can't wait.
This one, I'm going to just say this one just got a ton of votes, and I think it's because of the gloriousness of the randomness of this bad idea, and it is. And I want you to think of that person. If you've worked with a woman named Pam, have you worked with a woman named Pam?
I have not. No.
No, you don't. Do you know? Is there a Pam in your life of some sort?
There is a Pam in my life. Yes.
Okay. I want you to think of this person when I ask this question. Okay. Hire someone named Pam to manage Pam and call it done. Why is that a good idea?
It's a good idea.
Think about that, Pam.
It's a good idea because everyone in the company would know to go to who manages Pam. Like, who manages Pam? Pam. Like, it's easy. Just look her up. In active directory.
Good answer, Raj. Why are you going to do this? And by the way, Paul Lanzi, I want him to answer this question too. Go ahead, Raj. Why do you want to do this?
I mean, the only reason I can think of why this is such a great idea is that I've got one less thing to remember, right? I mean, hey, Pam managing Pam, like Dan said, that is just one less thing for the security team to remember. There you go.
Yes! It's excellent branding is what it is. It's perfect branding. All right, let's go to the next question here. I think this one came in from Sean Bowen. I think I saw him do this one. Confirmed. By the way, who did the Pam one? The Pam on Pam. Please pipe up. Or maybe they said it already. I can't see because again, I don't know who puts these in. But this I think came from Sean Bowen, if I remember seeing it come through. Make the CEO, and I'm going to throw this one to you, Raj, first. Make the CEO the super admin and the sole approval authority for all other lesser admins. Why do you want to do this?
That stumped me there. Look, that is just, the best, because it simplifies your entire processes, right?
How does it? Hold on. Don't be facetious. I need to know why.
So
putting your feet to the flames here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one single process where the CEO approves everybody's request and everybody has super admin privileges. So everybody can roll up their sleeves and get everything done. That's
not good. Dan's got to get a better answer than you.
It ensures the access aligns with the business direction.
Much better.
Nice.
All right. Let me throw one. I'm going to throw one more question at you guys. By the way, this one's very much in line with the Pam one. I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't want you to answer this one yet. But only hire administrators named Bob so you can track all administrative events by looking for user Bob. Which, by the way, how many companies name their administrators administrator and you track it that way too? So that's, honest to God, that's not too far off what a lot of companies do right now. Yes, Dan?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, it's pretty. All right. All right, here we go. Oh, this one's a doozy. All right, we're going to close with this one. And I'm going to be impressed if you can pull this one off. I'm starting with you, Dan. Give you some more time, Raj, to think about this. Give everyone global admin, domain admin, so you don't even need PAM.
Okay. Trying not to be facetious about this. Global admin.
This is a tough one.
And this is a
This is
tough
a tough one. Yeah. Why would that be a good idea?
You know what? I hate to say this.
Yeah.
Both of you are losers on that one. I'm sorry. We'll play another round of it later. Hopefully, both of you can come back on it. Just you couldn't. That one was tough. Who did that last one? I don't know. Did you pipe up? Because that was a stumper right there. I don't think I've ever had both of the guests stumped on this. All right, let's go back to the legitimate questions that we have today. By the way, Christina, if you want to come on camera and ask your question, we would love it if you did. And then I will push you to tell us who you're going to be working for. But you don't have to say it. But I'll still push you regardless. Let me look. Okay. This is a good question for you, Raj. This comes from Sandeep Campbell. Hopefully you can answer this. What if the user is already compromised and then we implement your software? What happens?
Yeah. So look, I mean, if the user is already compromised, then then the historical. So again, right? So typically, the compromise, unless the compromise has happened over a period of consistently been misused over a period of 180 days, we will be able to see the pattern, right? Because remember, we're looking at historical pattern, right? And then if we see any sort of change in the pattern, even let's just say we're looking at 180 days worth of pattern, and then we see that there has been a change in the behavior like 30 days ago, we know it's compromised, right? So we know that it's compromised. At that point in time, we'll identify that as a compromised account, and then again, obviously that implies that we'll again tell our customers like, look, it's already a compromised identity that's using your infrastructure. So we absolutely are able to figure that piece out.
And Dan, this question comes in from Reese, which is good. By the way, keep these questions coming in. And yes, Andrew just promoted the fact that we're going to do the icebreaker at the end. Again, if none of you have ever done our icebreakers, they are a lot of fun. You're missing out if you don't stick around for that, because we usually only get sometimes a third to a half of the people who are in this that join us for the icebreaker. And I know it's asking for extra time, but it's a ton of fun. So for these random meetups. So please stick around for that if you can. Question comes in from Reese for you, Dan. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't done it, click the link at the bottom to register for next week's video chat, because that link will change at the end of the time. So please click on that as well. So here's the question that comes in from Reese. Do you need approval before you give access in all cases? So I think she's asking about tiered approvals. And I'm sorry, Reese, male or female? My apologies here if I'm getting the sex wrong, or a they, a them, excuse me. Why can't you have tiers of access grants and report on grant or approve for grant? Example, you don't want to wait to grant approval for a SOC engineer who needs to respond to a breach, but you do want to log/report it. So how do you manage that in terms of immediate needs, not disrupting the business flow? I mean, I'm sure this is an ongoing issue. Yes, Dan?
It is. I don't know that it happens a ton, because what I would argue is that SOC analysts should have already had that access, especially if they're on some sort of if you have a 24/7 SOC, they are on probably some sort of rotation where their access is going to get bumped up when they're on rotation, then pulled back down when they're off. But this is a change in your environment, and you want to make sure that you are cognizant of that. So I think there are situations where you can set it up so that access is temporarily granted for an hour or two, and then revoked automatically. And usually that will give time to kind of get the manager involved, especially if you're talking in a SOC setting, to kind of come up to speed on, this is a crisis and we need to temporarily grant this access so someone can, perform a certain function.
And by the way, Raj, in your software, are there ways to create exceptions like, hey, this is unusual. We know it's unusual. Clear this. Yes. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, so look, I mean, you can certainly, so there again, this is the whole notion of like false positives, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so if there is we will send an alert, but then you can basically say, let's just lack of better words, attest it away, attest that it's not a false positive, right? So we absolutely have that ability. And also, just to add on to what I just also wanted to add to what Dan said, right? So there are a couple of key concepts when it comes to just the permissions management, right? So one is like, so classic case is developer, right? The developer, let's just say, wants some additional permission. There is a whole notion of permissions boundary, right? So effectively, think of it as think of it as like a pre-approved list of permissions that you can have, and then anything within that, within the permissions boundary, you get access to it, it gets logged, and then when you finish your work, you can actually yank out those permissions, right? Anything above the permissions boundary, you need explicit approval. Just trying to add on to what Dan mentioned 2 minutes ago.
By the way, I got some clarification on Christina's question, Dan,
Okay.
asking before. And Christina I have asked her many times to come on camera, which, by the way, she was a guest on this video chat a few weeks ago. She's not willing to come on because she knows I'm going to pressure her to tell us her new company. But that's all right. All right. So the question she's asking, you were talking about context-aware
Yes.
permissions.
Mm-hmm.
She's asking policy-based access control based on context, like, and I'm assuming she's referring to based on like Active Directory. So I'm gotta assume you're just doing both, or is there one over the other? Or, I mean, because I'm assuming if it's just policy based, then we have all the breach problems that we've had used before. And that's why context is needed in addition to policy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So essentially what I think Christine is getting at is this whole concept of for lack of a better term, a trust score. And if I just said something that some vendor somewhere has, copyright, I apologize. But, taking that policy and then having the additional context of those other attributes. Yeah, absolutely. You want to use them together.
Mm-hmm. All right.
100%.
Cool. All right. How much time we got left? We got 19 minutes left on this. Again, remember, click the link at the very bottom. We have more questions to come in. This one, okay. I haven't read this one. Let's jump into it. Comes from Rustam. Question: what is the appropriate definition for privileged access? Is application user, which can grant/revoke access, is privileged user? Is the database user with object drop crate permission a privileged user? I think privilege is a variety of levels, and I mean, isn't that, Raj? I mean, yeah, privilege is what you define it to be, and we all have sort of different levels of privilege, right?
Yeah, I mean, so look, privileged user is, think of it as like, there are certain set of roles and permissions that you provide, right? Mm-hmm. It could be at the application level or even the database level or at the infrastructure level, right? So, so again, it's all defined by the security team and the, lack of better words, the infrastructure ops team, right? So specifically, from a Cloud Knox perspective, we are right now focused on managing permissions for cloud infrastructure, right? Multi-cloud or hybrid cloud infrastructure, right? So for us, we work with the customer to define what is a baseline access, and if they want to elevate some permissions or elevate a role, that again becomes a privileged user, right? And then again, the role or the permissions elevation depends on the work or the job that the user or identity is doing. So yeah, it's kind of like you have to define it with the customer.
I'll take just a general approach outside of infrastructure, but to me, privileged access is anything that touches the CIA triad. So if you can access something confidential, if you can change the integrity of data, if you can change the availability of it, that's what I consider privileged access.
Let me ask you this, because this is a potential topic we're going to be doing on defense in depth soon, and I'm ever so slightly derailing our conversation, but since you brought up CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability, when you look at your security program, do you look at it through the CIA lens? Is that your main lens? Because that gets to our whole sort of privileged access issues, but those three things. I'm just interested to know if is that foremost in your mind when you're developing a security program, CIA.
If that's to me,
Yeah, Dan. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a foundational factor. But again, I would, that's, I think, very philosophical. So to go, I think, a little bit more, tactical on it, I'll usually, go down like, NIST CSF and then kind of think about, as we're talking about, like, let's privilege identity in particular, just kind of evaluate, what are the latest kind of thoughts and trends around that.
I got a question from Mike Wilkes, who came in, who had just joined us on video. And I'm going to throw this again to you, Dan. What's your best bullet point on PIM to present to the board of directors? Maybe a metric or an automated compliance test. Is there a metric specific around that you present?
That's a great question. Not in my current role, but in my previous role, when I was at Rally Health, we would talk a lot about, because we were a software-driven company, we would talk a lot about the number of software engineers that had privileged access, just because of the damage that they could do. And our goal was to continuously drive that number down as much as possible without impacting business operations.
That's a good point. Anything to add to that in terms of metrics, and maybe something that you generate on your side, Raj?
Yeah, so we do generate a metric which simply put, what it looks at is what are the high risk unused permissions, right? And so we look at the total high risk unused permissions and look at the number of resources that they have reach into, right? So you want to think about it as, how big is the attack surface, and then what are those unused high risk permissions again? So
that's a really good point.
Yeah, we combine both of them.
And I'm assuming driving, like what Dan said, driving those down. So that what he was doing was role based, but what you have is a combination of role and also the user permission, and you can sort of bring some visibility to that.
Exactly, right? So that's what we combine, and that's the metric that we actually leverage, and we ask our customers to consistently focus on, right? So obviously, the higher the number, right, that means the more of a risk you have, right? Because you have more unused high risk permissions.
Sure. Right. So let me ask you anecdotally, maybe you actually have some straight data on it. With your customers, have they done a good job of driving down that essentially that number of high risk, unused permissions?
Yeah, I mean, just to put things in context, right? When we initially go in, and what we do is we do a risk assessment, right? Risk assessment of your infrastructure, right? When we do a risk assessment, I kid you not, this is, roughly about 95% of the identities accessing the infrastructure use less than 2% of permissions granted, right? Less than 2%. Right, so that is when we see that, or when we show that to any CISO or anybody in the security organization, they are super surprised, right? And typically that implies that the risk score is closer to, if you think of it as a scale of 0 to 100, they're closer to that 80-85%, right? It takes time to clean up the permissions, and obviously the idea is to get it in the 20s, right? It's almost next to impossible to get it down to 0, right? In the 20s and the 30s is typically what our customers sort of drive towards, and it takes them about 3 to 6 months to get to that, depending on how large an organization they have.
Here's a good question that came in from Amy Seitz, and I'm going to throw this to you, Dan, first. I'm a policy writer. Are there policies that are generally missed or could be better?
I would say policies are pretty broad, but I do think where the rubber hits the road with a lot of the stuff is around standards. To what Raj was talking about specifically, we might have a standard that, quarterly we're going to evaluate permissions in our infrastructure, and we will kind of go through an entitlement review, and we'll kind of revoke those. I do think, and again, at the standards level, thinking about in terms of somewhere you are, and and what you do in terms of understanding your admins or your privileged identities is also something that could be, I think, incorporated. And I think it's one of the leading edge areas for organizations. a lot of people think about governance and GRC, which is most of the times where policy resides, as like just like this, auditor check the box. But really, that governance has to be pervasive throughout the entire security function. And privileged identities, it's got to be super strong. Otherwise, your IAM or your IGA or whatever you want to call it, it's going to be a complete mess.
Question from Will Tulaba. This is right up your alley, Raj, and we've only talked briefly about essentially machines trying to get access. So yes, I mean, this is pretty direct. How do you battle bot identities that are the new hotness as companies try to automate processes to save money during this trying time? So, I mean, there's API security issues. There are lots of ways that partners are hooking into systems in automated ways. Maybe start with, what is the difference between automated behavior and user behavior? What's the general thing that you're dealing with?
I mean, generally what we sort of, some of the key differences that we see.
Or I'll say machine behavior, not automated behavior.
Yeah. So I mean, like, I think of it as like, human users and the non-human users or machine users. Right? Mm-hmm. Typically what you see is there is a consistency and a pattern in terms of typically when you look at each of these machine accounts, right? So the key again there is to right? So one of the key things is provide visibility, and then obviously the insights there, right? User behavior, typically there are less of those patterns, right? That's the reason why you need a significantly longer history to figure out what the pattern, lack of a better words, pattern, but really it's a broad set of things that we do, right? So that's one key thing that you have to sort of look at. The second thing that we certainly do is, I mean, our fundamental belief is that most of the machine accounts, right, typically do a lot of this execution at sort of, lack of better words, at given time intervals, right? So again, limiting these privileges, for lack of better words, I'll use the word, this high elevated permissions, right, to those time frames is actually, again, critical. That's the way you actually reduce the security or the risk associated with these machine accounts or non-human accounts, right? That's, again, key for us, right? Side note, again, right, the way we think about it is, there are three key things that you have to always think about from an infrastructure point of view, right? One is the identity and the actions that the identities have taken, and to expand that, it is what actions have those identities taken on resources, right? So from a security perspective, right-sizing the permissions associated with identities is good, but you also have to think about right-sizing the permissions associated with identities on which resource, right? So that's the three dimensions that you always have to think about from a security perspective.
And how much of, you can speak to Rally Health. I know, referencing what you're doing in Village MD is tough because you're 2 weeks there?
Yeah, 2 weeks in. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you fixed everything, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
They gave you a 2-week limit.
I'm retired.
Fix it or you're gone. What are you dealing with these same issues when you're dealing with machine connectivity here?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that I've found to be effective, because, Rally, we had 800 software engineers out of a team of 1,600 employees total. So you have like this massive like engineering arm, is, just as, and being a healthcare company, we had a standard that we would do entitlement review quarterly. And that's not on humans. Like, that has to extend to the machines as well, and to the bots as well. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you've got all this access creep on the machine side, on the bot side, and you wake up one day and you're just like, it's almost like unused code, right? Mm-hmm. You have unused code sitting in your repositories. You still have to patch that. You still have to keep that up to date. And so it's the same thing with the machine side of privileged access. You have to, run some scripts, do some reporting on that, see what's needed. If it's still being used, and if it's not, you have to shut it down.
All right, I am going to throw one more bad idea at you guys, because this one, by the way, this one has the stench of Dutch all over it. I haven't seen, but I'm going to guess Dutch wrote this one. And by the way, this one is so bad that if I'm going to give you guys a pass on this, and that if you can't come up with a good answer, it's okay, because I can't think of a good answer on this one either. All right. But if you do come up with a good answer, you are the grand prize winner of the Department of Yes game. So get ready, Dan. Are you ready?
Right. I'm ready. Go ahead.
Play Chutes and Ladders as a drinking game. Every time you slide down a chute, you must change your PAM vendor. Why is that a good idea?
It's a good idea because when you change your PAM vendor, you really kind of evaluate kind of the needs of your organization, and so you don't have your business requirements always stay fresh.
Not bad. All right, hold on. I want to see before I get grant you winner. Raj, can you overdo that one?
I can't overdo that. Let me just give him the prize there.
All right, the prize goes to Dan. Good job. I will say it right now.
We've got a winner.
Good job, Dan. Very impressed. Very impressed with that. Excellent job. All right, we have, how much time we got left? We have 5 minutes left. So you know what? Let me give a little bit of time right now for summary notes. And then, if you haven't change it now to our meetup. Andrew, the link at the bottom is going to change to our meetup. Everyone can click on that now and just get ready for the meetup that's going to happen, because we're going to shut this down exactly less than 5 minutes from right now. So I will ask you, Dan, just any kind of closing comments you'd like to make. And if we have another 2 minutes, I'll ask another question, but just want to make sure that we get this in right now. You are dealing with this very issue. How have you dealt with it successfully in the past? And you're like, this is how I dealt with it in the past, and it didn't work. And maybe my colleagues did this, my friends did this, and I realized this technique doesn't work anymore, and I got to move on from this. What say you?
So I think I'll talk about like a non-technical way and then like a technical way.
Sure.
So the non-technical way is, and I think this will resonate well with this audience, is you reach out and ask for help. There was a previous life where I walked into a situation and we were under credential theft attack and we couldn't shut it down. Mm-hmm. And they looked at me. I just came through the door and they said, Dan, go figure it out. There's some hesitation of just not asking for help, which is, dumb. So ask for help. Technically, I think it goes to, again, it's, human behavior generally is extremely predictive. And so, I think kind of, understanding that, taking advantage of the kind of the metadata that is sort of an output of the technology that we use is also very important. And thinking critically about, there are some things that just don't change. And the metadata of this output, it's very hard to kind of spoof some of that, not all of it. And then human behavior doesn't change, even to the point of, if you're looking at like a bot on let's say there's a bot on a banking website, that bot is likely going to click on the same spot on the submit button for the credentials. So taking a look at kind of, looking at technologies that can kind of evaluate those types of factors.
That's a good point. It'll always click the same spot on the button. Didn't even think about that. It's a good point. Raj, your last thoughts of, you could say like the problems that you've seen when customers come to you, like the common ways that have been trying to deal with this issue that have been falling short.
Yeah, so that typically when customers come to us or any enterprise company, right? So the common challenge that they face is that they have zero insight into, or practically no insight into, what any identity is doing on the infrastructure, right? That's basically, they're like, look, I am trying to apply my traditional Windows-based, role-based access controls in the cloud infrastructure, right? And the big difference is that number one is the number of permissions, right? Across the AWS, Azure, GCP, and vSphere, there are about 40,000 permissions, right? And then massive number of services. So it's just not even the same volume, right? So they have a huge challenge just getting basic visibility, and hence insights is actually very challenging. And so remediating and fixing the challenges is also tough, right? So what these enterprises are looking for is just help us at least to get started with a very easy way by which I can figure out the permissions gap that all of us are talking about, right? And then figure out what's the implication and how do I fix it. Right? It's as simple as it sounds, in a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud infrastructure world, that is a huge challenge and a very complex problem to solve. Right? That's basically what they're asking, right? And when we show them, it's just basic data that I was articulating, right? That 95% of the identities are over permissioned with high-risk privileges, and they use less than 2%. In fact, some places less than 1% of the permissions. That is scary, right? When they look at that, that's literally what I'm seeing across pretty much every enterprise company.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. All right, we're wrapping it up. We got 30 seconds left, so I'm going to thank our guest right now, Dan Walsh, who is now the CISO over at Village MD. Thank you very much for your insight right now. I hope that you learned something from our community as well. Thanks
I always
to
do.
you, Raj Malampati, who's the COO of CloudKnox, who was our sponsor today of our video chat. And we are going to all head over, all of you head over to the Icebreaker right now. 5-minute one-on-one meetings. It's all you have to do is show up, get your microphone and your webcam working, and we're going to all chat. So signing out now. See you over there. Bye.
Bye.